Welcome, everybody, to Free Association, the podcast where two guys wear bomber jackets, but one looks better in them because he's just better looking in general and pulls it off. And that's for you to decide if you're watching on YouTube. I'm JD Bunkis. He's Donnovan Bennett. We're closing out the decade, man.
We are.
That's your thoughts? Is it? You must be a fun guy to spend New Year's with.
Newsflash. New Year's is overrated.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you learn that when you're like 23 years old.
It's a lot of hype. It's a lot of money spent on the experience that is ultimately the same. You spend more on an Uber or a Lyft or whatever your taxi service is locally. Spend more on bottles, on booth service, and it's not the same. Everyone wears black and silver for some reason, and there's high expectations of the night, and then people are just disappointed. That's New Year's for you.
I've never had booth service. I've also was never aware of
bottle service. Like you're in a booth.
Yeah.
And bottles
I know what it
bought
is. I've just been poor my whole life. I look up at those people. I'm like, how do you get up there? They're like, money, kid. I'm like, don't have it. Disqualified. They're like, are you handsome? Are you a girl? Nope.
Well,
nope.
actually, wait.
Yeah.
There's actually, I mean, it depends.
Yeah.
If you're going to buy drinks at the bar all night, if you did the math, you're actually spending more standing in line waiting for this free pour drink than if you just bought a bottle and poured them yourself.
Let me tell you something about me. Not a book guy, not a bottle service guy, not a math guy, not a very versatile human being. Hey, you want some dumb Raptors takes? Here's the spot for you. You want me to annoy you with New Year's takes? You've come to the right place. Math? Pretty tough. I was pretty much a 65% in math guy, and if I pulled that off, I was pretty stoked about it. Were you good at math? I feel like you would be.
No, I'm terrible at math.
You're terrible at math?
I was terrible at math. But
what was your strong suit subject?
I'm sure there's young children listening to this, so I want to be careful what I say, but there is diminishing returns with math.
Depends.
Well, it depends clearly.
If you can be an engineer, if you're smart, it's like, go do that.
If you're going to design things that we're going to put in space, then I want you to be able to do high-level calculus or even algebra. But if you're just figuring out how much change you're supposed to get back at the grocery store.
Tap.
Well. Okay.
Tap it.
The point is, after elementary school, you don't need that much more math.
No, you really don't. I will say, though, for those of you kids who listened to that and said, yeah, they don't need math. They're doing it. Here's the thing, children. My friends who did the math and became engineers, they're living high on the hog. They have properties.
Or work in finance.
Yo, yeah. We have nothing. Donovan has stuff, kind of. I have nothing. You don't want to see how I live. It's like Lenny, in The Simpsons when the wall falls down and he's just eating cereal with a wife beater on. It's like, that's my life. He's like, please don't tell people how I live. That's it. It's all a masquerade. All right. Ready for basketball?
Yeah.
All right.
We're not supposed to say
what?
WB anymore.
Oh, is it just a beater? Is it just a tank top?
Yeah.
Yeah, all right. Clean that up. Let's clean it up in post. No, we won't.
A marina.
All right. So I just wanted to start with this. We're going to go do Raptors All-Decade team on this show. We might even share a thought on what this decade is really going to leave an imprint on us with. But the Raptors played the Cavaliers, and there's no more rivalry. There's no more juice. There's really nothing about that game that makes it special anymore. It used to be such a high event. PK Subban used to come down to the building. It was a night where Drake would be in the house. Celebrities would come through for LeBron and the Cavaliers. And the reason I bring this up is not...
Stop.
So, go ahead.
Celebrities would come through for LeBron.
Yeah.
Not the Cavaliers.
Right. But
he just happened to be on the Cavaliers at that time.
Yes.
But when he was on the Heat before that, and when he's on the Lakers now, the celebrities still come through.
Yeah.
So it had little to do with the all in, whatever what's the Cavaliers slogan?
I think that's it.
All four in or some garbage like that.
Oof.
It had nothing to do with them. It had everything to do with, like, people weren't saying, man, Danny Ferry's coming to town. Can't wait for those Cavs. Mike Fratello's coaching. Let's go. Can't wait for those Cavs tickets.
Larry Nance Sr. is coming to town. Then you would get the tickets. You'd see some dunks. My point is exactly that, though. Cleveland won a championship, and then they lost LeBron James. And now the franchise comes to town, and they feel completely irrelevant. They also lost David Griffin, who was the architect, depending on what you believe when it comes to LeBron James' level of being the GM. They lost Kyrie Irving. The turnover for their star players was they lost both of them, right? Kevin Love, I think, is wildly overrated. He's not a winning guy anymore at this point of his career. He's more of a nice piece you can fill out a roster with, kind of an interchangeable piece, really overpaid if you ask me. Probably one of the worst contracts in the NBA, especially since it extends past the 2021 free agency. But this was kind of where I wanted to go with it, is the Raptors still have Masai Ujiri. They've had their infrastructure. They have a lot of similar players from the Raptors championship run. Most of the core is still intact. Guys are taking improvements. You can see what lasts from the ripple effect of that championship season. But over time, the Raptors lost Kawhi Leonard. It's less likely, I would say, now than a few weeks ago that the Raptors are going to be competing for an NBA title this year. At some point, all things fade. At some point, Masai Ujiri will leave the Toronto Raptors to either become the president or to become something with the Knicks. Who knows? The world's his oyster, man. At some point, Pascal Siakam will leave the Toronto Raptors. My question to you is, what lasts with an NBA championship?
What lasts with an NBA championship?
What lasts? What lasts forever other than
the banner's not going
the banner?
anywhere.
But
the championship pack merchandise isn't going anywhere.
But what is there anything in your opinion that lasts in terms of a perception of the franchise? Because I look at Cleveland and I say, Cleveland, who would want to go there ever? It doesn't matter that they have a championship. Will Toronto suffer that same fate someday?
I mean, ever is a long time. A couple of things. One, it just reminds me that this is exactly why you don't buy division title or conference championship merchandise. Remember, the Atlantic is ours. Remember those shirts? Who's wearing those now?
No.
But when remember the Jays playoff shirts? Ready for October. Like who wants you want a championship piece of merchandise?
What did those say?
When the Raptors went to the finals, it's like Raptors NBA Finals editions. Just wait 2 weeks and see if they win. Then you could have a championship merchandise, which lasts forever, or you could then buy the finals merchandise on discount if you really want it that badly.
Did I not tell you my theory on this?
No.
Anyone who has the Run the East memorabilia or NBA Finals merch, to me, didn't believe the Raptors could win.
I mean, okay, probably.
That's signaling to the universe that you couldn't. You thought, it's just nice to be here. Finals, run the East, whoop, whoop. That's the championship. But you didn't believe in the Raptors.
And listen, I don't want to be dismissive because thousands of people bought both of those things.
I'm dismissive of you thousands.
But just who wants to walk around with a shirt that says, in 2015-16, we were one of 6 teams that happened to win our division after 82 games. Like what is that? Like what is that to flex?
You just touched on the first thing though that I think lasts, which is fan mentality. No longer will a Raptors fan buy an Atlantic shirt.
They should have never bought an Atlantic shirt.
It's true.
And in fact, they should have never hung an Atlantic banner.
But that's part of growing up as a fan base. I really do believe that. Now it changes what you care about and the measure of success that you will invest in a team. From now until the end of time, as long as the Toronto Raptors exist, or at least in our lifetimes, let's put it that way, it's going to be really hard to measure anything other than, well, the Raptors won a championship. And celebrating things like winning a division or winning a big game against a team in the regular season, they will ring a little bit more hollow. That the expectations for the group are higher, and it's going to be more difficult to just settle for mediocrity or being very good when really now everyone wants to see you be great.
But you shouldn't have settled for that in the first place. And
okay.
Dr. Phil often says, people treat you the way you allow them to treat you, which means like you set the tone based on what you're willing to allow and how you treat yourself. And so we'll use another sports team in the marketplace. TFC, they had, their wall of champions, and then they had a secondary wall of champions where they put up, oh my goodness, Jermaine Defoe was an MLS All-Star. Let's put that on a wall. I was like, really? Shouldn't you expect that you have someone who's on the All-Star team every year? Are you going to run out of room on that wall? Are you putting CONCACAF championships on this wall just because you are so desperate for something to celebrate? Then all of a sudden, you have people who come around and Michael Bradley's like, yeah, I make the playoffs every year. This is what I do. Yeah, we lift trophies every year. Hopefully it's multiple, not just trophies plural. And now it just, all of that stuff looks ridiculous. And so you're going to put Bradley and Altidore and Giovinco and Pozuelo eventually on a wall, and you have guys on a wall earlier that didn't do things nearly the same, which is why people get so in their feelings, rightly so, about the jersey retirement conversation for this franchise, because it's going to set the tone for the rest. And so in terms of you decide how people treat you, when you ask the question, well, what lasts with franchise, how you think of yourself lasts. So the Boston Celtics have a standard. To be up in the rafters, you have to be A, a champion, B, probably a Hall of Famer, and then we'll start the conversation. That's not the case for other franchises. There was a debate when Kyrie Irving was being booed going back to Boston, and we know his name will not be going in the rafters in Boston, even though he filmed a commercial about looking forward to that day. There's a debate on whether or not, circle it back around to Cleveland, should Cleveland honor Kyrie Irving at the end of his career? So he was drafted by there, won a championship. The biggest shot in the history of the franchise was hit by him. Con, he was the first thread that unraveled their championship sweater, and he left, and he didn't leave really on nice terms. So I think the thing that lasts is the standard that you have. If you're the Lakers, if you're the Celtics, how you hold yourself, what you're willing to do, and you set that tone from the beginning. So if you want to say a championship is the expectation, then you have to carry that through in everything you do.
This is why I wanted to bring you this question, because I think that's a really good answer. And I think that's the biggest part of all of this, is that what is going to last is that self-perception. When the Raptors won the championship, my initial thought was this is the end of the inferiority complex for the Raptors fans, that it's no more we the other. Who cares about that anymore? That has not changed. It hasn't. I think it's dissipated.
So you were wrong about that.
I was wrong to the degree that it was going to change things. But what I do think lasts over time is that will dissipate. That just doesn't go away overnight to me. That's the miscalculation I made.
But if the team stayed together, that championship team, and if Kawhi came back and doubled down on not only did we get him and did we win with him, he chose to stay, then I do think it changes.
Probably.
Because the inferiority complex this year came from what?
ESPN.
We're not top 10 in ESPN.
Yeah.
We won a championship and still no love. If Kawhi came back, no one care about the ESPN power rankings.
Right away, though.
Because they would know that you have the baddest person in the room on your side.
Yeah, I think that if Kawhi comes back, it dissipates even more. But that there is a lessening of it. That there is still an attitude of, well, we're the champs. The championship is in the North. This is what there is a different level of contentness. The ESPN thing definitely went viral. That's what I miscalculated, is you can't just change everyone's perception overnight. It just doesn't happen that way. But for a large population of the fan base, especially people that did kind of bandwagon on, glom on, start with the franchise a little bit later, don't have as much of a history with this franchise, it's a different perception from them. It is a growing thing. And that's what lasts is fan perception, the standard that you have in this organization that you put better than I can, but also the outside look at the city. I really believe, in my heart of hearts, the showcase that Toronto had during the finals run, their fans, seeing what it means to play for the team that's in Canada, whether it was watch parties in Edmonton or Sault Ste. Marie, wherever they were showing those watch parties, it had a real impact on me as a Canadian, but I would have to believe on other people in terms of the Canadians who play in the NBA or who are going to grow up as a Canadian to remember those memories and what it would mean to win a title for the Raptors and why it's different for the Raptors than anyone else. And B, for other, I would say, American-born players or international-born players to recognize that there is a different culture here and that not everything is a negative like customs and no ESPN, that there's a real tangible benefit, not only from marketing opportunities and for making money off of the court, but also from the way that you're remembered and immortalized by a country, that it is different. The stakes are bigger if you win for a country than if you win for the Milwaukee Bucks.
We'll see.
Hear that, Giannis.
TBD, because we've had this conversation in terms of baseball. Ooh, No one's going to come and play for these Canadian franchises, whether it's Montreal or Toronto. Oh, all of a sudden, 92, 93, got all these American players. Dave Winfield is telling everyone what a great opportunity is here. He's telling Ricky Henderson, dude, come with. It's amazing. Paul Molitor the next year, very same thing comes. You overpay to get Roger Clemens a couple years later, and then it falls apart. And still this offseason, we're talking about, oh yeah, you could try and get Garrett Cole if you want to, but you're going to have to give him more term and more money to come and pitch in Toronto. So, and the success is not even that far away from 92, 93. This team was really good, and the fans were crazy, and people talked about the atmosphere in 2015 and 16. So we'll see how much it is lasting. I still think that in terms of recruiting players in the NBA, you need to figure out in life what your inherent advantages are. Everyone has inherited advantages and disadvantages, right? I'm not tall. I'm not going to be an NBA center if I wanted to, but I have a good memory, so I can remember some basketball stats. The inherent advantage of this market, the disadvantage is no ESPN cable, no metric system for your kids, Antonio Davis, all that stuff we've talked about. The cold for Kawhi. The inherent advantage is, well, wait a minute. Let's look at the landscape of the NBA. The best player in the world, he's Greek. Luka Doncic might be the second best player in the world. Joel Embiid's pretty good. The game is becoming more and more international. What's the most international city in the NBA?
But that's what I'm saying. Showcasing
New York
matters.
Or Toronto. Toss up, right? You can take a 15-minute drive and have high-level food from any continent in the world in this city. I think you need to almost change the goalposts and say, are we going to get the American-born players? The guys like Westbrook and Harden and Kawhi who were born in California? Maybe not. Would Kemba think that playing in Boston is a bigger deal than playing in Toronto? Probably. But can we go and get some of these international players that are being that are taking over the league year after year, and there are more coming? I think yes.
Yeah.
And the Canadian players, you'd hope it'd be a no-brainer. Forget about the watch parties, just because of the Fortune 500 companies that are trying to sink money into basketball right now.
Yeah, I think the one difference with, well, the sport is different, but the problem with the Blue Jays one is that you're in the same division as the Yankees and Red Sox, who are just going to outspend you every single year. And so it's difficult to stay competitive. You can't have it both. Whereas the Raptors can remain competitive with having similar pieces. And I do believe that perception around the Jays has changed from some of those players, that some guys right now would look at Toronto a little bit differently if the team is good and say, yeah, I'd like to live in that city. Of course I'd want to live in Toronto.
Did you see the news for the Blue Jays from the winter meetings? Yeah, there wasn't.
Yeah, but the team stinks and the Yankees and the Red Sox are good. The Yankees especially. They've got this incredible super team. So it's really difficult. It's like it's far more circumstantial, I think, in baseball than it is in the NBA. It was awesome to have the Raptors showcase the city in the summer. It was great to have the parade where people actually got to see the sun shining here. It was great to have all the different features on what Toronto's about, getting to show the love that they had for Kawhi Leonard, getting to see those watch parties, getting to inspire Canadian kids, getting to alter the perception of the fan base. Those are the things that last to me. Those are the things that are going to be important. And when we look back on all of this, I think that is going to be the major gift that the Raptors leave behind.
I think those are pluses, but I don't know if they last because the Suns for a while were the place to play. Great training staff. Scottsdale is one of the best places in the U.S. You've got an ownership group that was led by first the Colangelos, then Steve Kerr and David Griffin.
But that's what I mean. Roster and personnel turnover, those things just they don't.
But I think it's in a way it's leadership, right? The Suns were a great place to play then, and then all those people left, and the ownership changed, and now they're one of the worst places to play.
But if you win in
the
Phoenix,
city's the same. When you land in Phoenix, you look around. The temperature's the same. The strip in Scottsdale is the same. The golf courses are the same. But what changed? The people running the organization and the perception. And so Cleveland, LeBron was able to get guys to take less or to take buyouts to come play with him because he was there and because David Griffin is there. They're both gone, and now the players are talking to the Athletic about how much they hate John Beilein, right? Like that's so as that changes, there's only so many of those guys. Bob Myers is in Oakland, all of a sudden it's the Bay Area. It's not just Oakland, and Oakland is dump. It's, oh my goodness, the Bay Area is a gateway to the Far East.
But this
Look
is
at all
the
these
stuff that
Chinese
lasts.
investors.
That's it. That's the stuff. That's what I'm saying, is that what will last off of titles, what is most important in terms of changing the ultimate perception of your franchise or its potential over a long period of time, is unlocking and showing what is so different and special about your place. And forever, Toronto was we the other, and the connotation was negative. And now, after this titles run, you look at Toronto and we the other is this great thing. We the other means the things that you touched on. It's the different culture. It's the expansive different experiences that you can have in a city like Toronto. It's being embraced by all kinds of different people all over just the entire country. It's different. It means so much more to win here to such a larger populace than it does so many of those markets you mentioned. This is now an era where guys want to be more than just basketball players. That is what we're learning. That is a big part of this decade. If you want to be more than just a basketball player, you have marketing opportunities in Canada that are different than other places, that are greater than other places, that are more expansive and more visible. It used to be that you were invisible there. Now it's not that case. You've been opened up to all these other possibilities as a player, and I think that's what's going to last. People now will look at Toronto and say, it's a huge market, it's a beautiful city, it's a wonderful country, it's a great place to live, it's safer. There's just the check boxes of what they got to showcase were poor cold weather in one, and then really nothing else. It's still the customs, and as cable packages get smaller and smaller, like what's ESPN at some point? You'll be able to get it on anything that you want. So the negatives are just getting completely toppled, and this championship run did such a huge job in changing those things.
I mean, I think the CRTC will make sure that you can't get it on whatever you want, which is a good thing for us. Right. But I do think, though, that these things flip quickly. And Miami was a great place to play when Shaq and Wade were there, and then Shaq left and it fell apart until LeBron got there, and then it was like, who doesn't want to play in South Beach with their friends, until LeBron left again, and then it fell apart. So I just think that these things change. When Jerry West was in Memphis, oh my goodness, it's a college atmosphere, grit and grinds, it's amazing. And Jerry West left, and Memphis has never been the same since. Yeah. So I do think that ultimately players, but personnel men.
Oh, for sure.
Whether it's Bob Myers or Masai or David Griffin, all of a sudden the Pelicans are able to get J.J. Redick to take their money. Is that happening 2 years ago? I don't think so. No disrespect to Del Damps, but I don't think so. All of the great players wanted out of New Orleans. Now they have Zion and they have a real leader, and people are like, oh yeah, I'll go eat some gumbo and throw alley-oops to Zion, sure. So I do think that it like anything, it changes. What becomes a good market can become a bad market if it has no leadership, and it's up to those individual markets to find what their inherent strengths are.
Yeah, I'm not ever going to push back on that. That's correct. That leadership and players is what's most important in the moment. I'll close with this, and then we'll break and do the all-decade team. I think my conclusion is that championship lasts in certain places, but you have to have something really special about your place. And I don't mean there's nothing special about Cleveland. I've been there. It's a fine place. But there are certain markets. You mentioned Miami. Miami lasts. It gets to showcase the tax havens. It gets to showcase the weather. It gets to showcase the advantages of winning there. You mentioned the Bay Area. Things last because you get to connect with people in Silicon Valley, business opportunities that are outside. Same with the Lakers and the Celtics that you mentioned, just in terms of the history of the franchises. Those are the things that you get to sell. The Toronto Raptors and winning a championship. Maybe I'm foolish. Maybe I'm being a little naive and a little bit overly sentimental and biased because I'm a Canadian. But I just think that championship really showcased the advantages that our country has to offer when it comes to playing basketball here, what the organization has to offer, what the city has to offer, and that those things, to me, will last. Go ahead.
We'll see. 2021 will be the ultimate report card on this entire conversation. Because if
2035 might be the ultimate report card when there's a class of 8 Canadian kids maybe, and they're all hit free agency at once, they make a super team in Toronto.
I would love it.
Yeah.
But if they strike out big in free agency, assuming that's the path that they end up taking, then the same narrative will persist. That, well, you won a ring, but because you got Kawhi on a rental and even he left, that was your one ring. It's an anomaly, but you can't get guys to come there, so you better draft and develop them like Pascal.
I hope I'm wrong, but I hope there's no potential for Toronto to ever become a Cleveland, this version of a Cleveland again. Quick break. I want to tell you, as always, about our NBA newsletters. You go to sportsnet.ca/newsletters, and you sign up for Stevie Young's weekly NBA newsletter. It's great. I enjoy it. I like it. I know Donovan does as well. And if you sign up for it, I promise you will like it too. And as always, subscribe to this podcast and leave a 5-star review. If you're listening on iTunes, you're right here. Do us a little favor. Do us a little holiday present. A little gift for so the decade is coming to a close. It's 2020, which feels so weird. I can remember where I was for what was supposed to be Y2K, thinking the world was going to come to an end. And now we're 20 years later. I've now been out of university for a decade, which is startling for the kid, the old kid, getting real long in the tooth. But yeah, it's 2020, which is going to take some time to adjust to. But in honor of the decade, we put together our 10 and 10, our 10 Raptors players that define the decade, our all-decade team, if you will. We did it, I think, a little differently. Do you want me to set up my premise first or the way that you did it?
You set up yours first.
So I cheated on mine because all-decade teams, a lot of times, I think that our list would have been very, very similar, and it probably will be anyways in terms of the 10 players that the Raptors had. It's not overly controversial. I think there's a couple of bubble names, but ultimately it's really hard not to lock into, I would say, 7 or 8 of the Toronto Raptors and not have maybe 6 and not have them be the same for us anyways. So because the Raptors have had so much turnover in that decade, I didn't want to just give it to longevity because the Raptors won a championship, and they won a championship with some guys that, like Marc Gasol, who had just shown up. They won a championship with a version of Pascal Siakam that had only been really around for that entire season. I did mine as the all-decade team that I put together based on my 10 favorite Raptors seasons, while also incorporating actual Raptors that had real significant impacts. Like, you couldn't have one without the other, but they're still the 10 Raptors who define the decade for me, that when I look back and I think about between 2010 and 2020, these will be the Raptors that I close my eyes and think about. I just used their best statistical seasons to pick the best versions of themselves when building my team. Did I explain that well?
I hope so.
Okay. I just pull around the room. Does everyone understand? So I'll start. How's that? To try to give you an example.
Sure.
I cheated to start. Actually, should I do my bench first or starters?
Do the starters first.
Okay. I cheated to start. My first player of the decade, 2009, 2010, Chris Bosh.
Just sneaks in there.
I would say the argument here is that if I'm putting my team together, I only get Chris Bosh starting in 2010. So all of 2009 statistics should essentially be irrelevant here. But Bosh in 2010 was 52% from the floor, 36% from three, 11 rebounds, 2 assists, 24 points per game, and 8.4 free throws per game. He was setting himself up for free agency. Where I would dock him in this argument is he never gave the Raptors clarity. He kind of robbed them down the stretch of, hey, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to leave the Toronto Raptors. It was like, well, nobody's really sure, but he had kind of figured out with he had figured out with LeBron James and Dwayne Wade well in advance. They knew they were going to Miami, and the Raptors really blew an opportunity to trade him and get some pieces back. But those raw numbers, it's hard. Chris Bosh, it does feel like he's sometimes the Raptor that gets lost in the shuffle because of some of the playoff disappointments, because he got roasted the way that he did by Shaquille O'Neal. He just never really felt like a dominant player of his era. He was always an all-star. He was always kind of campaigning for himself. But I felt it necessary to throw Chris Bosh in here because he is now, I think, a little too often overlooked.
I mean, it's probably because of the way he left, the fact that he did leave, and the fact that he hit higher heights, maybe not personally, but certainly professionally, in Miami. So I assume you're putting Bosh as a center?
I'm putting Bosh as my power forward.
Oh, okay.
I gave it consideration. I did. I really did. But Chris Bosh is my starting power forward on the decade team. Yeah, I did this like an all-star ballot of old. I should have also explained that. I didn't just pick the 5 best players or 5 best seasons. I have a real legitimate starting lineup here. But yeah, the last season of Chris Bosh in Toronto, that's a big moment. The franchise had a huge turnover, And he still defines it because it became the Miami Heat, the Heatles, the making super teams era through free agency. Those are all happened, and Chris Bosh was a part of it.
Interesting.
He's not on your list, I take it, of your top 10.
He is not on my list, no. So I guess we'll go position for position.
Yeah.
My starting power forward is Pascal Siakam. I assumed Bosh was your center because I assumed Pascal was your starting power forward because I could make the argument. One, I mean, he's got a bit of tenure now in the back end of the decade, but I could also make the argument that his height, and you're actually stressing yours on the height of the player. I'm putting less weight on height, and I'm giving more weight on duration of time in the uniform in the decade. But I can make the argument that Pascal Siakam's height, which we are seeing second half of last year, and all of this year, is higher than any player this decade as a Raptor other than Kawhi Leonard last year. I think he's playing at a higher level than Kyle Lowry ever got to. I think he's playing at a higher level than DeMar DeRozan ever got to on both ends of the floor. So you're talking about a guy who's giving you 9.3 win shares, and his true shooting percentage is 62.8. Like, those are Hall of Fame numbers, and he's giving them to you right now. So forget about the ascension of what he's going to do, what he could be. He's this guy who started as a rookie, gave you value immediately, was giving you value all throughout the organization, G League MVP, but also when you won a championship, he was your second best player. And I would say his height for the decade, he's the second best player. My starting power forward is Spicy P.
Pascal Siakam gets the benefit of this. This is my consolation prize to you, Mr. Siakam. When
Wait,
we do
he's
the
your starting
2020,
center?
No, when we do the 2020-2030 team, guess what's going to happen? If you put together the season that you're starting with, we're going to be doing the same thing here, where I point to this season and say this was an all-decade team season. Because you're right, the numbers across the board, right as of right now, as of this season, are excellent. The problem is that where we're currently at is 26 games, and so I can't give him that. And the season before,
But what about last year?
I don't think a season where Pascal Siakam averaged 17 points a game with 7 rebounds and only getting to the line less than 4 times a game. He was just not where Chris Bosh was at that point of his career. And that's not a bad thing. He did a lot of things well. He was, I would say, a better defender still at this point of his career. He ran the floor better than Chris Bosh did. But Chris Bosh was a beast. 24 a game and 9 free throws.
Yeah, for 1 year.
Yeah.
And Pascal Siakam. So if we want to do calendar years,
That's what I'm doing.
Go the beginning of this year and last year before the All-Star break.
I'm doing it by seasons.
So you're giving Bosh the benefit of the doubt. There's the second half of his last year.
Yep.
The season happened to be in this decade.
correct.
But you're shortchanging Pascal because the second half of this year happens to be in the next decade.
I don't want to have to come back to Siakam, so I'll just bring up that he is on my bench. He is on, obviously, my bench, and I have him for his 18-19 season. And again, it's because this one is incomplete. But last year, Pascal Siakam legitimately came up as a real number 2 on a title team. He overcame some demons in the postseason, I would say, just from the standpoint of he got locked up in that Philly series. He really struggled to score. He had a moment in that series where when he tripped Joel Embiid and hurt his leg, there was the potential, as we discussed on the What If podcast, that he would be looked at as the GOAT of that postseason. Instead, it ended with a game 1 against the Golden State Warriors, where he came out and embarrassed Draymond Green, who had just taken to the podium and said that he was the best defensive player on the planet. And Pascal Siakam went off and dominated him. He averaged, like I said, the 17 points a game. He averaged the 6 rebounds. He took over the offense and showcased himself on the 22 games or the 22 nights that Kawhi Leonard took off. So for me, 18-19 Spicy P, the emergence of him as a legitimate number 2, that is the bench player for my Toronto Raptors decade team. That's 2 down. Want me to move to my starting center? Oh, actually, I'm going to save my center because it's going to be the most controversial.
So that's your bench power forward?
I just took bench as my best 5 guys. I kind of did it a little bit with some chemistry in mind, but that is my bench power forward / I have 2 power forwards on my bench.
Dude, you're just all over.
Actually, I have 3 power forwards.
Your team is a mess.
Yeah.
Who's your starting center? Let's get this back
right.
on the rails.
My starting center,
Yes.
2018-2019. Marc Gasol.
Your methodology makes no sense because you just shortchanged Pascal for only being good in half of the year. Yet Marc Gasol has only been here. As Marc Gasol, he's actually not even been here for an entire calendar year. Yet he's made the decade team all of a sudden. He hasn't been here for 365 days, but he's your starting center on the decade team.
Yes, he is. And now let me explain why Marc Gasol.
Wait, time out. Neither of your starters so far, Chris Bosh and Marc Gasol, were Raptors for a full calendar year in this decade.
Yep.
Okay, all right.
And the best part of the Gasol hypocrisy is that you know how many regular season games he played for the Raptors last year?
Like 30?
26, which is exactly the number that I will not give Siakam credit for this year. Here's the difference. He went into the postseason. This is my case for Gasol and the all-decade team. When I look back, JV was a fine center. He was a good center, and he probably deserves to be on this list. And if you want to make the case for him, which I think you will, I'm fine with it. My case for Gasol is this. He was 44% from three in the regular season with the Raptors, and he had 4 assists, 10 points, and 6 rebounds. And 2 of those things are extremely important.
Do you want to talk about his percentage from three in this part of 2019?
Here's where, it's been great. Here's where I think this is most important. Marc Gasol coming here did 3 huge things. One was his three-point shooting spaced the floor for the Raptors and completely opened up a new dynamic for Kawhi Leonard. 2 is that his defense was the final puzzle piece of turning the Raptors into a really, really good defensive team with some really, really good players to 5 guys on the floor where you just could not score on them. He gave them a presence around the basket with his verticality that this team had sorely missed, and was the bugaboo with Jonas Valanciunas throughout most of the decade was, can you close with Jonas Valanciunas? Can you close with this center? You finally got a center you could close with. The other part was the playmaking, the 4 assists. When Marc Gasol came to the Raptors last year, they went from one of the worst assist teams in the NBA to one of the best assist teams in the NBA. He completely changed the culture on both ends of the floor, and he went into the Philadelphia 76ers series as, in my opinion, the second most important Raptors player. Everyone remembers Serge because Game 7 he hit the shot, but really, the Raptors don't win that series without Marc Gasol. They do not beat Joel Embiid. They do not have him shut down the way that he was against Marc Gasol. The real pivot point in that series, outside of Kawhi Leonard knocking down those threes, was Marc Gasol's defense on Joel Embiid and the way that he just completely locked him up. And then when Nick Nurse started matching their minutes. So when I think back of the Raptors of the decade and who had the best seasons, Jonas Valanciunas just never had the impact that even came close to that Marc Gasol half season and playoff run. And that is why he is my starting center on the Raptors all-decade team.
Yeah, my starting center is JV, who from 2015-16 to the first 30 games, 2018-19, he basically gave you a double-double. He led your...
That's his legacy, double-doubles.
That's
a good legacy.
That's not bad. He led your team in all those years in terms of defensive rebounding, and for a big, he was incredibly efficient, specifically from the right block, but anywhere from low 60s to high 50s was his true shooting percentage, and everything he was asked to do: extend your game to the 3-point line, come off the bench, and be better defensively, which by the end he did and did not complain. He is my starting center for the all-decade team.
I do not have Jonas Valanciunas on my list. Yep. If I was doing this based on longevity...
Played too many games.
Yeah.
You played too many games.
You did.
How dare you play for more than a calendar year?
Oh, that's good. All right. That's if this was around the horn, that would have been a big point for Donovan on that one. I think we can both agree that the next 3 starters, we have lockstep.
I hope so.
Yeah, well, one of them fits right in the category of only played 60 regular season games for your Toronto Raptors, but was a finals MVP and is the most important player of the decade, not even close second. It's Kawhi Leonard, 18-19. I think we can keep this short. Like, what do we even really need to say about Kawhi Leonard that everybody doesn't already know? Do you have a thought?
What it do, baby?
Right.
That's my answer.
Here's my thought on Kawhi. It was nice having the best player on the floor every night throughout the playoffs. That was pretty cool. Really enjoyed that. Thanks for the ring, Kawhi. Sorry we didn't do a better ring ceremony for you with a huge lion in the sky like I advocated for.
I mean, listen, he's had one postseason, and then he just so happened to set every scoring postseason record the franchise
He's
has.
the greatest mercenary in NBA history.
So, yeah, there's no question. I argue that he should be on number 1 in everyone's spot in terms of the greatest Raptor of all time. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you he's not one of the 5 best players in the decade.
When you close your eyes and you think about the Raptors' decade, the first thing that's going to come to mind is Kawhi Leonard in the corner, that shot over there, watching that rim bounce, knock in, and that'll be it. That's what you'll remember.
When I close my eyes, I don't think of the Raptors decade.
I do
It's
sometimes.
not something you do. When you
I mean,
close
what
your
if I
eyes.
say, close your eyes and think of the Raptors decade?
No, thanks.
And I do it with music, and it's soft, and we're at a spa. Would that not relax you thinking about the rim bounce?
No, that's a borderline HR violation.
I would. I think about the rim bounce all the time. It's the best. I still watch highlights of it. You know what actually my favorite thing about the rim bounce to do is to watch the reaction videos of the rim bounce. That actually gets me choked up to this day. Like that is a puppies seeing soldiers return from war and Canadians reacting to the rim bounce. Those are my two those are the videos. You want me to cry? You want me to cry on cue? That's what you give me, and it's gonna go down.
I think we have our audio for the promo, guys.
Yeah.
That's what he just said.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We're getting a commercial today. Shout out to the associates for letting us get that. My starting shooting guard for the Raptors All-Decade team is 2016-2017 DeMar DeRozan. He was third All-NBA this year, not his second All-NBA season, but this one was by far the best. First of all, this was DeMar off the contract. This was the loyalty brand. This is what endeared DeMar DeRozan more than anything else. He did not take a meeting with anybody else. He waited in LA. He signed a contract with Masai Ujiri. And then he went out, and as a scorer, he just dropped 27 points per game on 46% shooting, getting to the free throw line, a career high 8.7 times per game. DeMar's a scorer. He scored a ton. And this was a year where I didn't want to put it later because DeRozan's career ended in a really ugly way with being benched with the Cleveland Cavaliers. When I think of DeMar DeRozan, I will remember the loyalty contract. I will remember those moments of talking about DeMar DeRozan MVP. I will remember the SI list of him being ranked too low and the starting of DeMar DeRozan showing out to the league how you can improve year over year. He started taking steps as a playmaker this season. It's his best statistical year from a scoring standpoint. And so for a scorer, 16-17 DeRozan is my all-decade team shooting guard.
Yeah, interesting, because I actually think in 17-18, he rounded out his game. He started to shoot threes.
Better playmaker that year?
He most certainly was all NBA, kind of flirted with some MVP conversation, even though that wasn't really real. And I think the improvements in his game got him to a place where it was even plausible for him to be traded for Kawhi Leonard. So, but you couple those two seasons together, 15-16, 17-18, he was putting up Vince-like numbers. Mm-hmm. And Vince has always been that high bar in terms of Raptors because he gave us so many great moments and great highlights. But when you look at the production, DeMar DeRozan is right there. So I'm very comfortable with him as my starting shooting guard in the decade. There's really no debate in terms of the backcourt. It's DeMar DeRozan and it's Kyle Lowry.
So from a technical standpoint, you're correct because of DeMar DeRozan's real legacy, which is that he is someone who improved his game year over year, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's hard to say, was DeMar DeRozan not better the year that Donovan said? Yeah, no, he was better. It's just that year, it ended in such disappointment. This is the year the Raptors are going to be different. This is the year DeMar's rounding out his game. He's playing defense, and he couldn't get on the floor against the Cleveland Cavaliers. OG Anunoby ends up being more impactful in a series against the Cleveland Cavaliers and LeBron James than DeMar that year, and it's why I do want to remember the good times where he was scoring all the points, and the Raptors at least went to a 6-game series against the Cavs. Kyle Lowry. It's good that we finish on Kyle Lowry for the starters because he's still, to me, the greatest Raptor of all time from the all boxes checkpoint, which is longevity, greatness, everything. Definition of what the fan base was and the toughness that he brought to this organization, what he represented is great. I picked 15-16 Kyle Lowry, who I have called new body, who dis. Kyle Lowry showed up after getting embarrassed by the Washington Wizards, like badly embarrassed. Every single game, other than game 1, stomp out. Game 4, they were supposed to show up and show some sign of life. They just basically quit on the season. Lowry and Casey had contentious post-game ceremonies that I can still remember where I was to this day watching it, where he didn't endorse Casey, and it was a little bit difficult, and you wondered what was going to happen with Kyle. He had a whole offseason where people criticized him. And then all of a sudden, a photo. All of a sudden, someone's Instagram, I think it was Kyle O'Quinn's Instagram, and it was, someone wrote, "Is that Kyle Lowry?" I think it was JJ Redick. is that Kyle Lowry. And you thought maybe it was an optical illusion, but then the guy showed up at NBA Media Day and said, I read everything you guys wrote about me. And he stared at Michael Grange, and he stared around the room, and he was pissed. And that was FU Kyle Lowry. He had, I think, it wasn't his best statistical season, but he went from a 38% three-point shooter he went to a 38% three-point shooter on 7 a game, up from 33% on 5 a game. He was 20 points a game, 6.5 dimes, 4.6 rebounds, 2 steals. It's his best defensive season by player efficiency rating that he's ever had as a Raptor. And he finally got over the playoff hump, and he had what I think is still, before the Raptors championship run, his defining moment as a Raptor, which is when he had 35, 9, and 7 in Game 7 against the Miami Heat. Kyle Lowry in 2015, 2016, the FU season for Kyle, the over-the-hump season for Kyle. That's my point guard.
Yeah, it's funny because he actually in 13-14 had, in terms of win shares, even more impact. But I think the thing for me is he's been good since then. Like, we're now in 1920. And when you look at the franchise leaders in win shares, it's like Vince Carter, Kyle Lowry. Like, it's just him. And he's had that impact on the team. He's been the engine that continues to drive them. And so that's why, for me, it's no question he is the point guard of the decade.
All right, so let's move to the bench. I already told you I have Pascal Siakam on my bench, so you should start.
Well, since you started with bigs, I suppose I'll start with bigs as well. The starting center for me on the bench is Mfuzi Chef, Serge Ibaka. And he's at different roles. He's started. He's come off the bench. But he's always had an impact. And I think when he came over, the team did take another level defensively, even though his defensive numbers specifically at the rim are not at the level that they were in Oklahoma City. And even though when we talk about a player that came over and changed the defensive identity, a lot of that love is given to PJ Tucker. But Serge certainly changed the willingness to at least challenge shots at the rim, which was not necessarily the case when Amir Johnson this decade was patrolling the paint. And so that's why I have Mfuzi Chef as my center. And when it mattered most, despite the fact that he's had some down parts as a Toronto Raptor, when it mattered most, he was lights out against the Warriors in the finals. Taking a step back 3 in a big moment. When there were parts of his tenure here when he had a 3 and he would think about it and people would scream, just don't shoot. And so I got him as my starting center.
I will always remember Serge mostly for 2 things. One is hitting that shot against the Sixers, and I think he finished with 23 points in that game. He was the one who gave the Raptors secondary scoring. And 2 is that he made Kawhi Leonard eat beef penis, and that was the first time I believed Kawhi Leonard would stay as a Raptor. And I've never enjoyed a athlete's YouTube channel or an athlete's podcast or anything along those lines like I enjoyed that episode. It's almost enough to put him on the all-decade team, but I do not have him on mine. You mentioned another big that I have on the bench. I have Amir Johnson, 2013-2014 Amir. 29 minutes per game, 10.5 points per game on 56% from the floor. He shot 30% on 1.3 three-pointers a game, which, if you remember, that was summer 3, as Matt Devlin used to yell with Amir Johnson. 1 steal, 1 block, 6.5 rebounds. Here's why he needs to be on your all-decade team. Amir Johnson was the ultimate culture guy. Amir Johnson is one of the first guys in this city that I can just remember doing everything. He was Mr. Embrace all things Toronto. I love being a Raptor. I love being here. Him doing zombie walk. Him just going throughout the city. Him having Amir Johnson fan nights where he would give people tickets away. He was active on social media. He had to have a secondary social media account while he was here so that he could interact with fans better. Any person who's ever met Amir Johnson, any Raptors fan who has ever met Amir Johnson, you won't find one negative review. He backed it up with his play. He was an extremely important Toronto Raptor. That was the best version of himself. He did everything what the team needed, and he was one of the best glue guys this team's ever had, and he was one of the best guys off the court. 2013, 2014 Amir Johnson, all-decade team.
So the real Toronto man this decade was Patrick Patterson. And Amir Johnson was here, and he was present, and he was in the community. He also lost a lot of games. Patrick Patterson did not lose very many games. In fact, when the Kings trade happened, and he was a big part of it, the team automatically got much better. he was a staple on their bench. He was really the first stretch four they had when the four position for a long time was a wasteland. Talking about zombie walks, how many times did Patrick Patterson rent out a theater and have Raptors fans just come and watch movies with him? He did a Players Tribune talking about his love for the city. And, he showed us his love in the city. Patrick and Sarah Patterson got married this offseason when he wasn't even playing in Toronto. So if you're renting out Casa Loma for your wedding, married? I believe so, and you're renting out movie theaters for the fans, and you're giving me some stretch four and some ability to switch on D, you are coming off the bench as my 4 in the all-decade team.
He is also coming off my bench. I could not ignore 14-15 Patrick Patterson. You know why? Because he was the PER advanced stats stud. And that's why the only way you can measure Patrick Patterson is with advanced numbers. And that was his best season. Pat, 122 offensive rating, 108 defensive rating. His VORP, value over replacement, 2.8. That's 1 win higher than any other year he ever had by that category. Same goes for his win shares of 6.1. That's 3 more than he ever had as a Toronto Raptor in any other season. 13% usage rate, 45% from the floor, 38% from 3. The co-captain with Lowry in the bench, which is one of what I think is the best bench units that this team ever had. It's second to bench mob. So, yes, I also have Patrick Patterson there with me, the 14-15 version. Want to move on?
Sure.
Or any more Pat thoughts?
No.
I have 2 more players to go over, and one of them is Lou Williams in 14-15.
How many years did he play here?
You got it. To me, give me excellence over time and mediocrity any day of the week. You know what I'm going to remember? I'm going to remember...
Not his defense.
I will not remember his defense, but you know what I will remember? I fell in love with the Coco. 2 girlfriends at the Blue Jays game. The audacity and the amazingness of it, and the fact that he would just never talk about it is so great. Winning 6-man and then getting Drake to write a song about you. The way that Lou Wills closed games with that move, the way that Lou Will drew people into fouls in that season with those things. He never passed. He averaged 2 assists a game that season as a guard, who averaged 15.5 points. But Lou Williams was an experience, man. Lou Williams in the purple dinosaur jersey is one of my lasting memories of this Toronto Raptors decade. I could not leave him off this list. He's a closer. He was awesome. He's one of my favorite Raptors. He's one of the coolest guys I think who's ever lived. So yes, Lou Williams, you are of course 14-15 version, the only version that we ever got to see. It was a mistake of Masai Ujiri's not to re-sign him. Tough to see you go.
My starting small forward on my bench in the all-decade team is Terrence Ross. T-Ross, you want to talk about
You
moments?
love longevity.
I mean, I do. The decade was
You're
10
loyal.
years. But we could just go with moments. There's a while where some of the best Raptors moments were Terrence Ross in the slam dunk contest. She had a great performance. And Terrence Ross putting up 50 points. He both started and came off the bench for this team in this decade. He was drafted by this team in this decade. And he was traded, and they actually got a good return back in this decade. Terrence Ross makes the list.
You know what my lasting Terrence Ross memory is? Getting screwed by the shot clock keeper in Sacramento. And the Raptors being like, we're going to protest. Like, oh, cheap scorekeepers. And the Raptors get screwed once again by the NBA. Long live Terrence Ross. I always liked Terrence Ross. But yeah, not on the all-decade team. My last position goes to Fred VanVleet. What is there to say? You can't have a decade team without bench mob, and he was the head of the snake. Finally, Kyle Lowry got to have some minutes eased off the tires, and Fred VanVleet was the main guy for a group that was almost more so the identity of the Toronto Raptors that year. So Fred VanVleet, he was nominated for a 6th Man of the Year award. He did just about everything for this team, just a little bit of everything. He also was the beginning of the phases of someone who was overlooked, an incredible signing as an undrafted free agent for the Toronto Raptors. You were terrified when he got injured and the Raptors' chances at the very end of the season where they went into that series against Washington, and you thought, well, what are they going to do without Fred VanVleet? Because he was that important to the team. So Fred VanVleet, 17-18, you make my Raptors all-decade team.
So my starting guards represent a changing of the guard for the Raptors. Right? In the playoffs, we the North, we got an all-star backcourt with Kyle and with DeMar. My bench guards represent the standard of the franchise and what they're about. And they're 2 bench mob representatives, Fred VanVleet and Norm Powell. Guy and Norm, who was a second-round pick. Guy and Fred, who was undrafted. Both spent time with Raptors in 905. Both developed. Both have spent time as starters and as bench players, effective at both. But more importantly, both have massive playoff moments and both close games all the time for both head coaches in this decade, Dwayne Casey and Nick Nurse. Both of those guys, whether it is Bet On Yourself, FEVshop.com, or Understand the
You
Grind,
knew that way too quick.
UTG.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a couple letters and then shop.com.
I know.
It's not that.
I've never been to those
difficult.
websites.
They got their own brands, and they got a place on the all-decade team because they represent the best part of the Raptors, internal development.
I'll give you one longevity play, which is I also threw in coach of the decade, and that's clearly Dwayne Casey to me because he had 7 seasons of them. And
So, what?
Yeah.
This entire time you're talking about excellence. And
There's also
I
that,
want to
though.
be about the person at his highest level, the max efficiency.
Yep.
I don't care if it's less than a calendar year. If you play really, really well, Lou Will, Marc Gasol, you make the team. And then the guy who in his first year as a coach not only wins an NBA Finals, taking down some great coaches on the way, but then says, you know what? All summer, I got time. I'll coach Canada basketball. Based on your methodology, that guy's not your coach of the decade?
Dwayne Casey changed the culture. 7 seasons, 573 win percentage. The tough ones for Casey is he's 21-31 in the playoffs and only 41% against above 500 teams. But other than that, Nick Nurse is the coach. He won the championship. He was the assistant on the bench. But I cannot do Dwayne Casey like that. The 7 seasons, that means something here in the decade. If you get
Jonas
7 out of 10.
Valanciunas is listening to this saying, dude, what are you saying?
Yeah, Jonas Valanciunas never had an impact on the franchise like Dwayne Casey. That's a fact. So anyway, Casey's my guy. Nurse is your coach of the decade?
I don't know. I'm just flabbergasted at this point. I don't even know.
Here's what
Jama is my coach of the decade.
You know what you should have known about me? I'm a hypocrite. I do whatever I want. I'll go over the
Listen,
map.
Dwayne Casey is salt of the earth. He's one of my
Sonics
favorite-
fan. Knows Gary Payton
Well,
personally.
now we've got to it. Now we
Cheers to the
understand.
Seahawks.
Sonics fan.
Lives in Seattle.
I'm surprised Terrence Ross is not a starter for you.
Yeah, Terrence Ross, UW, that was a failure team. Him and Tony Roten sort of should have lit it up, and instead they blew it.
Okay, now this podcast is off the rails.
Yeah. Before we go, by the way, we're doing another podcast next week. We've recorded a couple of interviews that'll be up, so for the subscribers, you'll absolutely get it. It's just a couple of interviews that we cobbled together, and we want to have something for you guys to have over the holidays, and then we'll be back after them. But before we go, just quickly, what is going to be your lasting thought about the NBA from the decade? Let's put the Raptors championship aside because that's going to be our Raptors thing that we remember the most is that season. But what do you think 2010 to 2020, the biggest development in the NBA, was for you?
So, 2 things come to mind. One, in terms of on-court, Draymond Green swiping out LeBron James' private parts. And he had accrued a bunch of technicals to that point. He was pushing the limit. Literally, if LeBron James doesn't step over Draymond or Draymond doesn't retaliate, he's not suspended and watching the finals in a suite at the Oakland Coliseum, and he's actually playing in the game, the Warriors most likely win. The Cavs don't come back from 3-1 down. Draymond is never in the parking lot later texting KD to come to the Warriors. I mean, it is a butterfly effect, but so many things change for multiple franchises if Draymond isn't taken out of the game and the Cavs don't get back into that series. The other thing, and this centers around LeBron James, sometimes you have to be careful what you wish for. And there was a huge lack of trust between the owners and between the players in terms of where the money was going to go, who was going to get what, when. And when Dan Gilbert wrote his petty letter in Comic Sans, mad at LeBron James for, exercising his right as a free agent, and reached out to David Stern saying he has to stop this, and the players have too much power. And David Stern then saying, well, okay, when we own the New Orleans Hornets, we as in the NBA, when a bunch of other owners are upset, we're going to not let Chris Paul be traded to the Lakers, even though that would have been better for the NBA if Chris Paul and Kobe Bryant were teammates. There was a massive distrust throughout this decade, for me, between players and owners. Why does any of that matter? Let's fast forward to when the TV money is in flux and the cap is about to jump. The owners say to the players, hey, you know what? Why don't we smooth this? Why don't we have these increments go year over year so that there isn't a large jump in the cap and someone who just happens to be a free agent isn't making twice as much as they were? When we have the incremental revenue, the players said, haha, no. We want all of the money up front right now. We don't trust you.
That was he says.
That's exactly what they said.
No.
Michelle Roberts said, haha, no. And so what happened is you had this massive vacuum where all of a sudden the Warriors can have 4 All-Stars on their team at the same time and Kevin Durant. And all of a sudden, one free agent class, anyone who was up that year was making so much money, even though it may mean that it's a bad contract in the future, Joe Johnson. So we had a huge discrepancy in terms of the power between owner and player and what that meant in terms of how teams were able to manage players and their rosters. And I think a lot of it stemmed from the owners being in their feelings and the players being guarded against them.
Yeah, when I think about the decade, I think the Warriors are the team of the decade. You're such a Warriors fan. By the way, you're a bigger Warriors fan. It's like you, then E40, and then it's like a bunch of like rich Silicon Valley guys whose name I don't know. That's your lasting memory is the Draymond getting screwed over. That was a dumb suspension, though. I agree. It definitely is one of them. But yeah, Warriors team of the decade. The advent of just three-point shooting in the way that Steph Curry and the Warriors changed the NBA. The greatest what if, which is not having Jerry West step in and say, hey, dummies, don't trade Klay Thompson for Kevin Love. Okay, thank you. No, that's a pretty big wormhole that you would have opened up had that gotten done. But LeBron James' greatness, just a 10-year run of, I'm going to the finals every year. Who's going to play me? The greatest team versus the greatest player. And then, the ripple effect of that you mentioned. I can't do a better job of surmising that, but this was the beginning of the player empowerment era, and we will never look at sports the same way across the board. The NBA has not just impacted its own league, it's impacted other leagues as well. I think that the way that athletes perceive themselves largely has to do with the way that LeBron James kind of started things for people. Like, he is a pioneer when it comes to free agency and what he was willing to do and how he was willing to construct teams. And so, it's LeBron James's decade. It's the Warriors' decade. And subsequently, because of those teams and their power, they're both tied to that same narrative of player empowerment and player decision-making.
Just to follow up on that point, the decade started with LeBron James doing a special on ESPN, The Decision, telling us what his free agency was going to be and being crushed for it. It ends with LeBron James having his own media company, The Uninterrupted, which is being bought up by media players on both sides of the border now. And off of that, he's selling clothing. He has not just Nike apparel, he has Uninterrupted apparel. The paradigm has entirely shifted into his interest providing content for ESPN to people like ESPN coming to him and paying him because he's interesting. Yeah.
Long live the king. I love LeBron James. Got nothing to say on the matter. Subscribe to this podcast. Please leave a 5-star review of this podcast. If you want to write even a little bit more on the iTunes page, you can do that. Share it. If you see it on social media, you see it on Instagram, you see it on Twitter. Tell a friend, share it with a friend. We appreciate it. Have a happy and safe holidays to everybody. However it is you celebrate, just do it safely. Thank you to the associates. And have a happy New Year to you as well.
Enjoy the Raptors on Christmas Day.
Woo! Raptors on Christmas Day! Raptors Super Bowl! See you next year.